In part one of this series, Gary told the story of his awakening, the sudden awareness that synthetic EMF was at the heart of his suffering, along with synthetic chemical exposures. In part two, we began to explore the intriguing parallels between Gary's life and my life. Gary shares what led him to leave his lucrative career as a cabinet maker to the stars, where his journey took him next, the nature of the exposures he encountered, and how his health steadily improved as he gradually followed the advice to eliminate these synthetic chemical and electromagnetic exposures. Experiencing relief for the first time since his suffering began, Gary embarked on a new life, free from pain in the wilds of western Colorado 30 years ago. Gary also shares his thoughts on the calculus of electromagnetic healing, considering sensitivity, resilience, and one other factor I'll let you hear on the interview. We conclude this segment on a somber note, one that I won't reveal in this introduction, because I want you to experience the news exactly as I did during our interview, hearing it for the first time. Part 2 of the Unseen Unheard Conversation with Gary Lee Duncan. Here we go. Well, Gary, you and I, we're going to have to keep a little tally here of all the things that we have in common and talk about those at a later date. We both love helping people with electromagnetic poisoning, and now I hear about you on the commercial radio side getting an FCC license. I was on the amateur side getting an FCC license for amateur radio. And like you, I was told all the dangers of electromagnetic radiation. Interesting that they seem to have removed that from their modern programs, but anyway, I didn't absorb it, or I didn't believe it, or I didn't whatever until it was far too late. And I gotta say, love cabinet making. I had a chance to spend a summer with James Krenov one time, but let's put all that aside. We'll get back to the EMF focus. So you were really sick, and you had a very profitable business going there in Hollywood, and your health was improving, but as you say, you could never quite get on top of it. And then Dr. Roland Hallsworth was able to perform an accurate assessment and obviously an effective remediation, and that's really key. Two things to find out what the synthetic radiation that's causing a problem is, and then what can be done about it, if anything, in the particular home. So it sounds like that remediation would have put you in a new place, and I'm curious if you could continue the story and let me know what happened after that, and were you becoming more sensitive or less sensitive over time?
Probably the real clarification might come from breaking this down into the blocks of my story. First of all, prior to, let's say 1993, which is when I moved out of Hollywood to Montrose, Colorado. Prior to that time, I had gotten sicker and sicker and sicker. I'm working in the cabinet industry, breathing LA air, terrible diet, terrible lifestyle, toxic stuff, new cell tower, half of a block down the street, and I had my little tiny my RV parked in the cabinet shop parking lot is exactly underneath the glide path to the Burbank airport. Quite literally, when the landing jets would fly over my trailer, I could probably reach up and flip the rubber tires when they went overhead. So radar exposure and heavy equipment and cell towers, and, it was hell. That was a lot of money, a lot of fame, and a lot of accumulative sickness with absolutely no information or knowledge at all. I'd gone through 5 MDs, they knew nothing. All of a sudden, the whole thing fell apart, It just fell apart. This bulletproof job that I had went south fast. The entire LA building industry went into recession. My father was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer in Colorado. I just dropped everything and moved back to Colorado. So I'm sitting in my trailer in Colorado across the road from the Montrose airport and their radar and landing craft. And out my front window is a signal tower on Flat Top Mesa. Well, that was the time when I started meeting the right people. That's when Caroline Metzler came into my life and talked to me about cleaning up my diet and getting the chemicals out of my life. And then a year later, Dr. Earl Halsworth brings in the EMF information. Well, what happened from that point on, starting with this sudden awareness of the fact that electricity was causing this horrible inflammation in my sinuses, I started doing what Roland and Caroline told me to do. And I would get rid of this and get rid of that. We can't just sanitize our lives instantaneously. We're changing belief systems, we're changing lifestyles, we're changing location, we're changing purchasing, everything. Little by little, over a period of, I'm going to say 3 or 4 years, I started doing what they said, reduce the EMF. Roland loaned me his meters. I'd take it around, go, okay, well, this is a problem, jerk this, get rid of that, tone that down, shield it, change your diet. And over that period of time, things got consistently better. At the same time, that what I found is the cleaner I got, the more reactive or cognizant of my reactions to both the chemical and the electromagnetic poisons became. So you could say that my sensitivity was increasing as I got deeper into recovery. Fact of the matter is, it was probably always there at the same time. But the real crux happened 10 years later. I mean, we're talking 10 years of hell, when all of a sudden this unbelievable eruption in my life, a confrontation with an alcoholic landlord who got violent. I had to get a sheriff's restraining order to protect myself. I wind up out on the wild land. The third day, I woke up, had a cup of coffee, and I'm sitting there going, something's missing. Something's missing. And all of a sudden, I laid down the cup of coffee and went, yeah, it's the pain. I was now completely away from the chemicals and completely away from the electromagnetic fields in the wilds of western Colorado in the bottom of a canyon. And for the first time in I don't know how many years, 20 years at least, I felt normal again. This is Dr. Ollie Johansson, retired from the Karolinska Medical Institute in Stockholm. This is the institute that awards the Nobel Prize in Medicine. And he calls electrosensitization full function impairment. What that means is there's nothing wrong with us. In fact, there's everything right. We're having completely normal reactions to an abnormally toxified chemical and electromagnetic environment. And once I got out of that and I got into the wildland and I got completely free of it, bingo. Not instantaneously, like maybe 2 or 3 days, all of a sudden, I was well again for the first time in my life. And that's the beginning of the story of the next 30 years of my life. That was 30 years ago. And the story from there goes into the Land Stewart program and the Smart Shelter Network and the international biophysics community. It goes an entire new life. In terms of my resilience, it's a really hard question to ask, folks. I'm 78 years old, and so you have to go, well, definitely I'm in better health when I'm out of the fields and away from the chemicals. But the other fact of it is I'm a geezer, and so now I had a violent medical emergency this spring. I burst an eyeball, lost complete vision from a blunt injury impact repairing my truck. And so when you put all of that stuff together, I'm definitely more resilient to field impacts than I used to be. But am I losing or gaining ground because of the geriatrics? I don't know how to even begin answering that question.
The EMF Remedy podcast is a project of EMF Remedy, LLC. We'd like to be your trusted guide for achieving a better EMF environment in your home. The contents on this podcast are provided for informational purposes only and are not intended to substitute for the advice provided by your doctor or other healthcare professional. It is not intended to be, nor does it constitute healthcare or medical advice. Opinions of guests on this podcast do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the EMF Remedy podcast.